Hi everyone, my name is Wendell and I'm a project delivery lead at EnergyWeb. Today I'll be telling you about how our team is working to decarbonize the aviation sector using sustainable aviation fuel and the Green Proof solution. Here's our agenda for today. First, I'll introduce the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Certificate, or SAFC registry at 10,000 feet, what it is. We'll touch on who is behind the registry, how SAF promises to decarbonize aviation, the challenges it faces, and how the registry helps. Why the book and claim model is a good fit for aviation fuel, the unique value our Green Proof solution brings to this problem space. We'll also give a short tour of the platform and wrap everything up with a quick look forward to what is on the horizon for the SAFC registry. Now let me introduce the SAFC registry, which we brought live late last year using Green Proofs. The SAFC registry tracks the, back one please. The SAFC registry tracks the life cycle of sustainable aviation fuel as it changes hands from fuel producers to consumers. Next slide, please. The SAFC registry uses the book and claim methodology in which real-world SAF is booked on the registry by fuel producers and represented with SAF certificates that are ultimately claimed by airlines and consumers of aviation services. Besides fuel producers, the main users of the registry are airlines and corporate customers. Airlines burn the aviation fuel directly and can claim the SAF certificates to decarbonize their Scope 1 emissions, whereas companies that use air transport services to move employees or goods can also claim SAF certificates to meet their Scope 3 emissions goals. Each SAF certificate can only be claimed or retired once on the registry, which generates a public retirement statement, which can be used to make climate disclosures. So looking at this middle section of the diagram, you can see within the registry, everything is powered by the Green Proofs tech stack, including our worker nodes, to increase the overall transparency and verifiability of the inner workings of the registry. Next slide, please. Moving on, let's touch on who's behind the SAFC registry and what we collectively bring to the table. SAFC registry is a joint effort of EnergyWeb, RMI, the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance, or SABA, and Environmental Defense Fund, or EDF. Something unique about this partnership is that we're all nonprofits. We at EnergyWeb own the technical and operational aspects of the registry. We ran the requirements gathering process with our partners starting back in 2022. We architected and built the platform using Green Proofs. And the SAFC registry is owned by RMI and is governed by a combination of these four organizations and a multi-stakeholder board from the aviation industry. We're very fortunate to have partners with such deep ties and subject matter expertise to the aviation industry. RMI and EDF developed deep understanding of the evolving SAF industry and worked closely over multiple years to define the registry's goals and its innovative policy design that we ultimately brought to life in the registry. And throughout this process, they developed relationships with industry standards bodies, auditors, and other major players, which is crucial in a young industry such as the SAF industry, because you really want to stay in the loop of all these fast-moving conversations and changes. Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance runs in very similar circles to RMI and EDF, but has a slightly different focus on the sector, as its name implies. SABA is a consortium of companies who want to buy SAF, including many Fortune 500 companies and household names. I'd encourage folks to check out their website, flysaba.org, for more information on who SABA represents. SABA brokers multi-year deals between SAF producers and its members, and these deals stipulate that the SAFC registry is a source of truth for all SAF certificate issuances, retirements, and sustainability reporting. So as you can imagine, this drives a lot of traffic to the registry. And just one more word about our involvement. In addition to designing and building the SAFC registry, we at EnergyWeb also serve as the registry administrator. We onboard companies who want to decarbonize their air travel. So this is a quick plug for the registry. Please do check us out at safcregistry.org or email us at the company or at the email you see on screen if your company's interested in decarbonizing your air travel. So that covers who is behind the registry. This next section is a crash course in sustainable aviation fuel itself, what SAF is, its promises to decarbonize aviation, the challenges we're facing as a young nascent industry, and how the registry fits into all of this. So here's the situation at 10,000 feet. Starting from the right side of the screen, we can see the problem statement is that aviation emits a lot of greenhouse gas. About 2.5% of global GHGs today are the result of aviation, and this number is growing. Usage of air transport is predicted to increase 5-fold by mid-century. So 500% increase over the next 25 years is a lot of increased air transportation. But we also see SAF as a very promising piece of the puzzle. SAF is jet fuel that is made from renewable feedstocks with very short carbon life cycles. So these are things like used cooking oil that can be upcycled into jet fuel with significantly reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Life cycle emission estimates are estimated to be around 80% or less or more of what conventional petroleum-based jet fuel has. So huge increase in sustainability. Waste oil is one of the low-hanging fruits in this sector, but there's also really exciting developments of using things like renewable electricity through a number of conversion processes in what it's called e-fuels for the future of SAF. And since SAF is chemically identical to jet fuel, it's considered a drop-in solution, which means that it can be used by any aircraft today that uses jet fuel, and any new aircraft that's produced that might have a working lifespan of 40 years or more can just use SAF right off the shelf without needing any retrofitting. So this is a very exciting aspect to SAF in the decarbonization of aviation. So next, let's examine some of the main challenges that the industry is facing and how the registry helps. Starting from the top left, one major challenge for SAF producers is that their operations today are just not at the scale they need to be to meet current demand for SAF or to compete price-wise with conventional jet fuel. As a result, less than 1% of jet fuel burned today is sustainable. Next, many companies are interested in buying SAF to meet their sustainability goals, but the best practices and standards can be ambiguous for these companies, which slows adoption. So even if a company wants to do the right thing, it doesn't know how to do it in the right way. Similarly, third-party auditors and certifications exist for fuel producers today, but it's unclear how and where these credentials should be used in the whole process. And then finally, and this one's a little wonky, but in some places, governments actually provide incentives for SAF producers to upgrade their facilities or to produce SAF themselves. And this can affect the kinds of sustainability claims that can be made using this fuel. These types of considerations add a lot of complexity to the SAF certificate issuance process and pitfalls for fuel that might be mislabeled. And so these are all the things that we had in mind when we tackled the Safi Registry. Next slide, please. And the good news is that the Safi Registry helps with all 4 categories of these challenges and makes SAF much more consumer friendly. Starting with scaling operations, so we don't help fuel producers directly source feedstocks or build the facilities that they use to make SAF, but the Safi Registry does play a key role in supporting long-term offtake agreements between SAF producers and consumers, which enables producers to reinvest in scaling up their operations. We do this by serving as the registry of record in contracts with very clear rules of the road and rules of engagement. For the second point, we did our homework and reviewed all the major standards and thought leadership around SAF book and claim. And we spoke with many different types of registry users to learn really what sorts of policy innovations would bring value to their companies. We compiled all of these findings into the registry's constitutional document, what's called the Safi Registry Rulebook, that you can find at docs.safiregistry.org. And then regarding the third point, we built the Safi Registry to use existing certifications about fuel producers and their fuel. And these certifications are periodically reissued and may change. So we created tooling to monitor these types of events and touchstones to resolve disputes that may happen. And finally, we spent a great deal of time studying the policy risks and complexity around Safi issuance. And this culminated in the Safi issuance flow that we built. It's very user-friendly, it has guardrails against major pitfalls like mislabeling of SAF produced with government incentives. So you might wonder how the Safi Registry can turn data about fuel into trustworthy sustainability claims. The answer is the combination of the book and claim model that I'll elaborate on shortly, and EnergyWeb's unique green proofs approach. In the book and claim model, certificates representing the sustainable attributes of fuel are decoupled from the physical fuel so they can move independently. Let's examine the book and claim model by comparing it to another very popular model called the identity preservation chain of custody model. This is depicted in the top right. So something like single origin coffee beans follow this model, where there's no blending of the coffee beans with beans from other places. You buy coffee from a farm somewhere and receive that exact coffee. It likely has unique tastes based on its origin and is crucial to not blend these beans with beans grown somewhere else. In contrast to specialty coffee, SAF is chemically identical to conventional jet fuel. It's indiscernible to aircraft operators. We could follow the identity preservation model and keep SAF completely separate from the much larger jet fuel supply chain, but that would be extremely costly and energy intensive. So Safi Registry uses the book and claim model shown in the bottom right, where fuel producers book information about their fuel in digital certificates that, and then the actual physical fuel is then blended with other jet fuel in the conventional jet fuel supply chain. So these certificates are then sold on to consumers and claimed to be used for sustainability disclosures. And as you can see, since the fuel is blended with conventional jet fuel, it's difficult or practically impossible to track which jets end up burning the SAF, which is totally fine, since the certificates themselves are what track the sustainable attributes of the fuel, not the fuel itself. So the headline is really that book and claim provides the same atmospheric benefits to the identity preservation model while benefiting from the much more mature jet fuel distribution system. But as you can imagine, it is critical that the book and claim model behaves credibly for people to trust that the SAF certificates they're buying match real-world SAF. They need to know that the fuel actually exists, that its attributes match what's shown on their certificate, and that it wasn't double counted or tampered with along the way. This is where our green proofs approach comes in. We designed the Safi Registry to make full use of worker nodes, and these worker nodes are depicted on the edges of the diagram here. Worker nodes validate the data that's used in all major registry actions involving SAF certificates. You can see these actions here in the inner circle, and they include issuances of the SAF certificates. These are based on fuel documentation and third-party certifications. The worker nodes run a parallel issuance process and ensure that all the issuances follow the rules of the road embedded in the registry itself. Worker nodes also validate transfers of SAF certificates between accounts in the registry. They validate any modifications to SAF certificates. The rule book describes the circumstances by which a certificate can be broken into smaller pieces or further transformed. The worker nodes also validate all retirements and claims at the end of the life cycle for a SAF certificate. Worker nodes perform these roles by independently replaying actions on the registry to ensure that the internal rules were followed. So for each action, each worker node calculates the outcome that they found would be the result of that action, and then they cast a vote to EWX with that result. This is depicted here in the center of the diagram. And then the end goal is to reach consensus with the other worker nodes and essentially show that everything is operating properly. And this provides something like a real-time audit of registry operations. And this is important to SAF certificate holders, the general public, and regulatory bodies, that basically anyone who needs to be confident that the data and processes within the registry are operating properly. So even if a major failure were to occur in the registry that caused the certificate to be duplicated, I don't know how this could happen, but just hypothetically, the worker nodes would pick up the slack and they would catch this. And we see this as a very powerful and unique selling point for the Safi Registry. And here's another visualization of how the Safi worker nodes take data in, ingest that data, and then they cast votes to EWX. And we can see that they're doing this alongside other worker node solutions that are using EWX and green proofs, for instance. So let's jump into a quick tour of the registry, and I'll double click on some of those topics I've already mentioned. The registry homepage at safcregistry.org is a starting place for anyone who's interested in learning about the registry or possibly signing up. So if this description fits your company, please do check us out. So yeah, here you can reach our documentation and our onboarding process. We're gonna skip ahead. Here's a peek inside the registry. We're looking at an account owned by a company that's gone through the onboarding process. And as you can see, this particular Fuel producer account holds 3 SAF certificates. You can see those in the table in the center of the screen. You can also see some of the metadata for each individual certificate. For instance, the unit type code, which you might be able to see here, is the second item in that table. It is packed with information that is validated by worker nodes upon issuance, and anytime there's a change that might change the unit type code. And then moving through the table, each SAF certificate is denominated in tons of SAF. So we don't deal in gallons or liters, it's in tons. And as you can see, each ton of SAF abates about 3 tons of CO2 equivalent. So you can see that in that later column, the CO2e abated. There's also a bunch of other metadata that each SAF certificate carries around that all traces back to its origin. So in this table alone, you can see the expiration date, which is related to when that SAF was initially issued or when it was produced. And you can also see the country of origin that follows that SAF around. So from this view, if I were to click Issue SAF-C button, I'd be taken to this next screen and the issuance process itself. So here's the flow that the fuel producers use to submit a combination of documents and data to the platform to issue a new SAF certificate. As I mentioned, the issuance form guides users based on what they've provided. It ensures that the resulting SAF-C is categorized properly based on the incentive schemes that may or may not have been used, along with many other considerations. This is a pretty complex form. We've made it very user-friendly, as I mentioned, and we've really taken the complexity and simplified it for fuel producers, especially setting up those guardrails that I mentioned before to ensure that things don't get mislabeled. At the conclusion of the issuance process, the green proofs worker nodes review the relevant data and they validate the issuance result. Once a SAF certificate is born, a number of things can happen to it, including it can be transferred, it can be split, it can be retired or claimed. Here we can see the initial screen of the transfer process where users can denominate their transfer of the fuel in tons of SAF, or they can do it in tons of CO2 equivalent, which is very helpful for certain companies that may be using carbon for their emissions accounting. Again, the outcome of the transfer is validated by worker nodes voting. And then here we can see the final screen of the SAF certificate retirement flow, where a SAF-C is claimed so that it can be used for sustainability reporting. The user, to go through this process, needs to provide a number of disclosures for each retirement, including who the beneficiaries of the SAF certificate retirement are. Once again, worker nodes will validate the outcome of this process. And another major outcome of this process is what's seen on the next slide. This is a public retirement statement. These are issued for every single retirement that occurs. They're useful for sustainability reporting. They're public links, so they can be shared, embedded, etc., by those companies that are wanting to make those claims. And in this example, we can see the end user beneficiary is a company called Safco. It's claiming the Scope 3 emissions for this certificate, so it's likely a corporate customer of air transportation services. So the Safi Registry is online. It's operating today with the support of Greenproof's worker nodes. What's next for the Safi Registry? Well, our goal is to continue on our current trajectory. We'll continue growing and being adopted by industry. Steadily each week we're onboarding new companies. We're also constantly improving the registry and working on new features. One big area of focus is to further automate how data is ingested and validated within the registry. Automatic data, we want to improve how data is scraped from documents that are issued by fuel providers or certification bodies. We also want to work with third-party auditors to add cryptographic signatures to their certifications to enhance verifiability and decrease the chances of them being tampered or getting corrupted at some stage in the process. We're also super excited to take advantage of the new tooling and palettes that are going to add functionality to EWX and worker nodes. Specifically, we're excited to enhance the on-chain worker node consensus. We want it to be able to perform secondary actions on EWX. For instance, creating digital twins for SAF certificates directly on EWX to further enhance the auditability of the registry's operations. So In conclusion, our ultimate goal here is to increase the use of SAF to decarbonize the aviation sector using the Safi Registry. Green Proofs plays a critical role here as it increases the underlying transparency and credibility of the Safi Registry platform. Thanks so much for your attention.